Hi everyone, my name is Ivo Forte, and in the following presentation I will be discussing the concepts of science, knowledge, discourse, and power. Let's start with my background. I have a degree in literature and linguistics and a PhD in multimodal discourse analysis. Most of my work involves the discursive construction of knowledge and science. In fact, most of my recent publications are devoted to the construction of scientific meanings, their legitimacy, and their impact on ecology, environmentalism, and our human relation with other species. As we will see, all this is relevant to our topic because what lies behind this discussion is a place of social and human knowledge in the construction of sciences. So, in this presentation, I will be talking about the origin of social sciences and humanities, their systematic marginalization by capitalism, the redefinition of utility in capitalist neoliberal contexts, and finally, we will discuss a few strategies for resistance and change. My main thesis will be that these sciences are problematic for capitalist perspectives because they pose a challenge. They come from a critical nature. Let's keep that in mind. So let's jump into it. The origins. Both social and humanistic sciences present a few milestones in common. Although they affect differently each case, these three historical moments, classical antiquity, Enlightenment, and French Revolution, have an impact on them. Humanities possess a longer tradition linked to classical thought. The social sciences emerge with the ambition of applying scientific methods to the study of society. According to Durkheim, we can say that social sciences are the systematic study of human society and social relationships using empirical methods. The focus is on collective behavior, institutions, and patterns of social interaction. On the other hand, for Kant, humanities are the systematic cultivation of reason, moral feeling, and social aptitude that allows us to function as rational and dignified members of a moral community. So, the focus is on individual experience, values, meaning, and creativity, often using analytical, historical, or philosophical methods rather than empirical experimentation. But the boundary between these two fields is not always clear. Some disciplines sit at the intersection. Linguistics, for example, as a social science, it studies the empirical structure and variation of language as a social system. As a humanity, we may say it focuses on meaning and literary expression. Different researchers have taken different paths on these definitions. For example, Lévi-Strauss points out that linguistics occupies a special place among the social sciences. It is the one whose development is most advanced, and the only one that can truly claim to be a science. This privileged position is due to the fact that linguistic science is arbitrary, and that this arbitrariness makes it possible to abstract the sign from the object it refers to, thereby making the structure of the sign system the primary object of study. He grounds his thoughts on the idea of system and the systematic analysis linguistics can provide and other social sciences cannot. In a similar way, history can be considered a social science when it uses quantitative methods to explain social processes, or a humanity when it focuses on the interpretation of texts and the narration of unique events. If we consider philology as being linguistics plus literature plus history, we can solve this tension in the following way. For the social sciences, philology provides empirical evidence of how collective representations function over time. We cannot write a history of European nationalism without a philology of the words nation or folk. For the humanities, philology provides rigor. It prevents anachronism. We cannot project a 21st century representation of gender onto a 12th century text without philologically proving that the linguistic categories existed. We may say that linguistics provides the system and literature the event. Philology adds the history of meaning, and that history of meaning is the very fabric of what both the social sciences and humanities study. So the concept of social science is tied to the profound changes that shook Europe at the end of the 18th and through the 19th century. As we have mentioned, the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, radically transformed the social, political, and economic order, generating new situations that demanded to be understood and explained in new ways beyond traditional moral philosophy. The Enlightenment laid the foundations for this development by promoting the use of reason and observation to understand the natural and social world to the detriment of purely metaphysical or theological explanations. In this context, Comte's positivism emerged, proposing that society could and should be studied with the same rigor as the natural sciences. He proposed the existence of laws governing social functioning in order to predict and control social phenomena. By the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, thinkers such as Durkheim, Weber, and Pareto established the methodological and theoretical foundations of modern sociology, anthropology, and political science. As we have previously stated, humanities have a longer history. Their roots lie in classical times with the study of rhetoric, grammar, poetry, history, and philosophy, considered essential for the formation of the citizen. But, unlike the social sciences, humanities do not seek to formulate universal laws of human behavior, but the understanding, interpretation, and critical reflection of the cultural, artistic, and intellectual manifestations of humanity through history. Disciplines such as literature, philosophy, and art history focuses on subjectivity, particularity, and contexts. Whereas the humanities represent a millennia-old tradition of reflection on human condition, the social sciences are an intellectual project that crystallized in the 19th century through an empirical approach adopted from natural science. The marginalization of social sciences and humanities has its roots in positivism, but it consolidated in the 20th century with the expansion of a restricted notion of science based on quantitative measurement, controlled experimentation, replicability, and value neutrality. Under this system of thought, only what could be measured, calculated, and modeled is considered legitimate knowledge. When they did not imitate this model, social sciences were accused of subjectivity, lack of rigor, and speculative character. Humanities were even more displaced as they work with elements considered imprecise from a positivistic logic. The context. With the advent of capitalism, posed a new order, new conceptualizations, and new participants in the scientific narrative. According to Lakoff and Steele, narratives construct our world by embedding unconscious structures, frames, metaphors, and evaluative roles that shape how we perceive the world around and how we act on it. Narratives, as cognitive structures, make certain interpretations feel natural and inevitable, as, for example, framing the economy as a household, or better, crime as a virus. Also, make feel natural the solutions that they post, like killing the virus. Steve extends this insight, pointing out that narratives are the stories we live by, assigning characters, norms, and consequences. Together, they show that narratives are never neutral descriptions, but active forces that cognitively and culturally build the very worlds we inhabit. So, if narratives construct the world, no discourse is innocent, and every single one of them tell a story. They construct characters and place them in scenarios involving actions, processes, and consequences. Capitalist discourse constructs a narrative that grants social and human scientists a marginal role, while engineering, chemistry, and natural sciences lie at the center of the model. Capitalism not only transformed the economy, but also reconfigured the hierarchy of knowledge. Scientific disciplines began to be valued and funded to the extent that they could be translated into applicable technology, productivity, and ultimately value. The discourse of neoclassical economics uses language in a way which creates a character labeled consumer and represents consumers as egoists who are only interested in maximizing their own well-being, who seek satisfaction only through purchasing products, who always want to buy more, and no matter how much they consumed, they are never satisfied. Consumers can never be satisfied, no matter how much they consume. This story is told explicitly in places and more subtly through assumptions about what consumers want or prefer. This is Steve's definition. And in this context, there is not much human and social sciences can do to give the consumers what they are looking for. But this discourse evolved through the 20th century, as we will see. We can see the differences in each period and how the logic behind them radicalizes. In the 60s, productive accumulation based on industrial products was the predominant logic. In the 70s, that model began to dry out, so capitals looked for new ways of keeping up the income. 90s brought as a solution financial speculation, and right now the system consumes every resource that sustains it. So, the concept of utility ceased to be abstract or moral as in classical philosophy and became quantifiable. With the utilitarianism of Bentham and Stuart Mill, utility became associated with the capacity to generate pleasure and avoid pain, but in industrial practice, this measurement translated into efficiency and profitability. A science is useful if it helps to produce more in less time and if its discoveries can be converted into patents and marketable goods. This is science at the service of the system. As Marx puts it, in machinery, the appropriation of living labor by capital achieves a direct reality. The analysis and application of mechanical and chemical laws arising directly out of sciences, which enables the machine to perform the same labor as that previously performed by the worker. Under this criteria, the sciences were arranged in a pyramid of prestige and funding that had not existed in earlier periods. At the top were placed the applied sciences, physics, chemistry, biology. This was not due to their explanatory capacity, but rather to their transformative capacity. Newtonian physics enabled factory mechanics. Chemistry enabled synthetic dyes and fertilizers. Biology enabled industrial machine and biotechnology. Technologies and engineering are the direct embodiment of this utility, the bridge between abstract knowledge and production. Therefore, in this context, social sciences and humanities have two options: be subordinated or be critical. And please do not get fooled. Subordinated means legitimizing functions. Capitalism needs not only machines, but also subjects who operate them and consume products. Social sciences, and to a certain extent humanities, have historically been fundamental for managing, understanding, and pacifying the complex social fabric that capitalism itself creates. The construction of a narrative that renders acceptable the order proposed by capitalism. This is precisely the role of social sciences and humanities in their legitimizing function. And they do so very well when they operate through institutional communication, crafting a story that naturalizes industrialism, financial speculation, and the exploitation of nature, humans, and other species. Sociology and political science emerged as direct responses to social upheavals. The utility for the system was to diagnose social problems such as poverty or crime, transforming them into technological questions to be administered by experts, thereby depoliticizing class conflict. Psychology became a tool of capitalist utility by development methods to increase productivity and to manipulate desire through advertising and marketing. The critical function. Unlike engineering or chemistry, whose ultimate purpose is almost always productive application, humanities and social sciences harbor at their core the capacity to analyze, question, and denaturalize the very system that contains them. This critical capacity is the reason why, in times of crisis or strong neoliberal orthodoxy, these disciplines are the first to suffer cuts and attacks. They are accused of being unproductive, precisely because their product can be the delegitimization of the status quo. The very nature of these disciplines is critique, the deconstruction of naturalization. Philosophy and critical theory inquire into justice, ethics, and the validity of the economic system, unmasking the instrumental reason that guides it. History demonstrates that capitalism is not the only possible order nor the end of history, showing the existence of other modes of production and narrating the struggles and alternatives that have emerged over time. Literature and the arts often act as the uneasy conscience of society, making visible what the economic system prefers to hide: loneliness in large cities, the alienation of works, the loss of community, etc. The concept of cannibal capitalism, developed by Nancy Fraser, refers to the inherent tendency of capitalism to systematically devour its own necessary background conditions. Unlike economic accounts that focus solely on market exchange or labor exploitation, Fraser argues that capitalism depends on four commodified spheres: nature, social reproduction, the political public infrastructure, and expropriated resources from racialized populations, which it treats as free goods to be taken without responsibility for replenishment or repair. The system licenses owners and investors to help themselves to natural resources, ecological conditions, unpaid care, and public institutions, while offering no incentive to restore what is depleted. Over time, this structural free riding produces deepening crises: ecological breakdown, social reproduction collapse, democratic allowing out, and racialized violence. Despite this critical potential, humanities and social sciences are not immune to the pressure of the capitalist environment. In order to survive in increasingly commercialized universities and research centers, they are forced to adopt the language and criteria of utility, a process that some academics call the corporate colonization of the university. This manifests itself in several ways. Imperative to transfer and impact requires researchers to demonstrate the social or economic impact of their work, a concept difficult to apply to the study of medieval poetry or ethical theory, for example. To comply, they must justify their discipline in terms alien to it, like studying Plato improves business leadership or history helps prevent errors in business. There is a commodification in education. Humanities are sold as complement to train more creative professionals or professionals with critical thinking, understood as a soft skill for solving problems with the company, not for questioning the company itself. Finally, there is growing labor precarity. Paradoxically, the disciplines that study society are those that suffer most harshly from the transformations of the academy labor market. In this context of cannibal feast, the attack on the humanities intensifies because they become an unsustainable luxury. The extreme university's enterprise demands that the humanities not only be useful but profitable. This means the disappearance of entire departments and the conversion of study into customers seeking immediate employability that the system can no longer offer. Critical intellectuals are subject to social acceleration. They must constantly publish in indexed journals in order not to lose their precarious position. Deep thinking, which requires time and silence, is incompatible with the demanded academic productivity. Despite this attack, in a context of collapse, the humanities and social sciences become more necessary than ever. They are the laboratory of survival. When the model of production and consumption collapses, we desperately need narratives and tools to think about the transition. How is community rebelled when individualism has isolated us? Here we find history, to know how other transitions were made, anthropology, to know how cultures not oriented towards growth have appeared, philosophy, to ask ourselves what is truly valuable. They are the memory of pain. Without history, without chronicle, without narrative, the victims of cannibal capitalism are mere numbers. They are the political imagination. We need to think the new, to imagine other possible worlds. So, finally, the strategies for change. First, I'd like to bring the figure of the artist as lieutenant in the philosophy of Theodor Adorno. Far from the simplistic image of an elitist who defend art for art's sake, this figure involves two complementary levels. First, the artist is a lieutenant of a collective social subject, of which he or she is part. Through their work, they channel and give form to the experiences, sufferings, and longings of a society that, under late capitalism, is mutilated and reified by the culture industry. Second, this is perhaps the most deepest dimension. In a world where real emancipation seems impossible, autonomous art becomes the representative of a happiness and freedom that are blocked in social practice. It does not describe a better world, but rather, through its cryptic language and its negativity, it keeps alive the promise of a reconciliated reality. Only by being autonomous can the artist act as a true representative of a freedom that does not exist in society. Being mere entertainment or propaganda, it betrays its function. We consider that this function applies not only to artists, but to researchers as well. Musicians, historians, linguists, and other humanistic and social practitioners engage in social criticism by using their disciplinary tools to expose power, deconstruct naturalized narratives, and center the perspectives of the oppressed. Musicians such as Nina Simone confront racist violence and state repression through lyric and sound, refusing the role of mere entertainment. Historians, including Howard Sim, retell history from below, centering indigenous peoples, enslaved workers, and colonized revolutionaries, thereby challenging elite mythologies that naturalize capitalist progress as inevitable or benign. Linguists such as Aaron Steeb, George Lakoff, or Tom van Dyke, even Deborah Cameron, analyze how grammar, metaphor, and language ideologies either naturalize power relations, destruction, and social hierarchy, or conversely can be deconstructed to reveal alternative possibilities. Unlike instrumental social science, these critical practitioners take sides with oppressed groups, reveal systemic contradictions, and refuse to naturalize industrialism, financial speculation, or exploitation. In this case, I'd like to consider also Viktor Shklovsky's art as technique and his proposal to denaturalize habits. If the system grants a marginal role to human and social sciences, and this is naturalized even by scientists, perhaps we can apply them where they are least expected, or current social contexts. And in order to do so, it is necessary to develop strategies that bring them to the general public. This involves exposing the critique they pose: a different system, a different world, a different way of life. Reconfiguring the concept of utility without descending into justificatory servility. It is necessary to broaden the concept of utility to include historical understanding, critical capacity, ethical formation, social cohesion, and symbolic and cultural well-being. The useful is not what produces money, but what makes a society habitable. Narratives are ways of representing the world, and intertextuality is inevitable selective regarding what is included and excluded from the events and texts represented. Genuine interdisciplinarity. The crossing among disciplines can break the notion of measurement by showing how different kinds of analysis can contribute with valuable information. Democratizing scientific discourse. It is essential to recover critical popularization, public debate, and humanistic education from an early age in order to break the idea that thinking is only for experts, to revalue the world, history, and philosophy, and to form reflective subjects, not merely consumers. Resisting the total commodification of knowledge. It is necessary, finally, to defend spaces where knowledge is not subordinated to the market: public universities, basic research, independent cultural production, and free circulation of research and results. In this sense, the concept of scientism is central. Oskar Varsavsky, an Argentine mathematician and chemist who profoundly questioned the role of scientists in peripheral societies, synthesized his critique in 4 keys. The fallacy of scientific neutrality. Science is neither objective nor neutral. Genuine intellectual honesty consists in making explicit the ideology that guides research, rather than concealing it beneath a cloak of presumed ellipses. The scientist as a cog in the system. By accepting the norms and values of the major international centers, scientists deepen cultural dependency and intellectual colonialism, functioning as a mere cog in the established system rather as an agent of change. Rebellion as an alternative. Against scientism, Varsavsky proposed the figure of the rebellious scientist. The rebellious scientist's mission is to investigate the problems of systemic change, prioritizing popular needs. The basic idea is to politicize science in order to liberate it from the role as mere tool for legitimizing the status quo. So, new narratives. Because in the end, what's important is how we talk about our disciplines, how we think about our disciplines, and how we act in our daily working routines. Finally, I'd like to leave a few questions for reflection. What do we think about the knowledge we produce in a system that demands profitability? What have we experienced the pressure to justify our discipline or adapt our work in a market terms? What would a genuine interdisciplinarity collaboration look like in your context? I think these questions can help describe particular state of affairs and help face the challenges we have as social and human sciences in front of us. Thank you very much.